Today I'm going to show you how to replace the charging port in your iPhone 6s Plus. I will link all the replacement parts and the replacement tools down in the video description below. Now before you get all excited, make sure that it's not just dust or lint clogging your charging port, not letting your cable plug in all the way. More often than not, that's the only problem there is. There are two screws down at the bottom. They are a pentalobe screw. Once those are out, I can take my pry tool and pry between the plastic frame of the screen and the metal frame of the phone and lift the screen away from the phone body using a suction cup. There is a little bit of adhesive surrounding the edge, so be very, very careful as you're prying it up. I'm going to switch to my plastic pry tool to avoid damage to the screen. If you do damage the screen, you will need to replace it, and that will be a much more costly repair. There are two screws down at the bottom by the battery connector. I'm going to remove that metal plate and then unsnap the battery from the phone. There are 5 screws up by the screen. That metal plate comes off as well, and then each of these little screen connectors unsnap from the motherboard. They're very similar to Legos. Once those are removed, the screen pops off from the body, and then we have access to the charging port. The charging port ribbon cable unsnaps from the motherboard, and then there's a wire cable up here at the top that I can unsnap as well. That leaves 2 screws up at the top of the loudspeaker, and then another 3 screws down here by the charging port that have a little metal plate. We're going to remove that little plate. That leaves 3 more screws down by the wire connector. Set that off to the side so make sure it doesn't get in our way. There's 1 screw down by the bottom of the loudspeaker, and then there's a hidden screw down by the microphone and the charging port. Once that's removed, we can get rid of the loudspeaker and set that off to the side. Make sure you keep your screws organized. It is very, very important. There's a lot of screws here and they're all different sizes. There are 5 more screws here that we're going to remove, and that releases the Taptic motor from the charging port. That also unsnaps just like the same little Lego connectors we've been dealing with this whole time. And this is where you get your vibrations from. Now we can start to peel back the charging port from the phone. Be very careful with it. Even though it is broken, we might need it for troubleshooting later on. Rule of thumb is to try not to damage any components while you're removing them from the phone. There's 1 more hidden screw down here at the bottom, and then we can release the microphones from the bottom edge of the frame. There is a little bit of adhesive that holds them there. You can just pry that off with your metal pry tool. And then the whole charging port can be pulled away from the phone except for another hidden screw down here at the bottom. This is a grounding screw, so you can just remove that from the frame. Make sure to keep it organized, and the charging port comes loose. So this will be the replacement part. You might need to transfer over that wire cable. It just depends on how yours is shipped. I will link these down in the video description below as well. Now that the phone has more loose screws than Donald Trump, it's time to put everything back together again. Sit everything down inside of the frame, including the charging port and the headphone jack. Get that Taptic vibrator back into place, and then set the loudspeaker as well into place, moving the wire cable up towards the edge of it so it doesn't get pinched underneath the loudspeaker. Tape that metal bracket down into place, and then set the metal bracket on top of the little screw holes. Now pause the video here if you need to pray for a second, or just to keep track of the screws you've installed so far. Once those are all in, we can reattach the wire cable to the motherboard and then plug the charging port as well into the motherboard. Just like a little Lego connection, you'll feel it snap in underneath your finger as you press it down. Now, I personally like to test to make sure everything works and all the connections are good, so I'm going to clip the screen back into place and then plug the battery into the motherboard, and then turn the phone on even though it's not completely shut yet. Everything is good. Sometimes there will be lines through your screen or the screen will be gray. This means that your connections aren't good with the motherboard. So you have to reconnect the screen ribbon cables to the motherboard and hope that those lines go away. All my connections are good, so I'm going to screw back in those metal plates and then line the top of the screen up with the top edge of the phone first before I slide my fingers down the edges and clip the screen into the body. There's 2 screws down at the bottom. If you have any questions, leave them down in the comments. It's always great to have Instagram and Twitter followers, so hit me up over there. And thanks for subscribing. Hope to see you around.